not necessarily a good thing. I mean, if the whole world...
You mentioned that as well.
Okay, but like, you know, if you think about it in terms of ideology, you know, if the whole world changes around you, and you still stick to an ideology which was functioning in the Cold War area, then that's not really happening. And in terms of development, that's not because of the guardians of the state. I mean, the economic development is about society, and that's what basically started after the 80s, when you had like basically liberalization of the economy and people returning as actors and the state making a step backwards. So I think, I mean, of course, you could also say that this was a guardian state policy. I mean, there is like there's a credible debate that the coup of 1980 was actually made in order to make Turkey the neoliberal place it then became. Because with the kind of level of organized labor, socialist movements and so on, which you had in the 1970s, that IMF kind of liberal adjustment would not have been possible. It would have been impossible.
And there was not just Papandreou around in 1980.
True. But of course, you know, this is when the guardians, and especially when you think in military terms, when these guys make decisions, they always make shorter-term decisions, and they think, okay, let's kind of unleash this mixture of you know, Islam so that they don't become socialists, which was the idea in 1980, and of economic kind of liberalism, and then these people will become, you know, the type of people we want, like obedient citizens. But it didn't work out that way. I mean, it created like the largest challenge so far to the hegemony of these elites, and I think that the ruling party has made inroads, you know, like especially when you look at like the reform in the judicial sector and in the high bureaucracy. The old guardians are not there anymore, so this sense of continuity is not that given, I think. And well, what people think about this deep state depends very much on their political position. I mean, if you're close to the governing party, then you will have a very negative perspective on it, and you will see this basically as an authoritarian kind of clique which has ruled against the interests of the large majority of Turkey, of people in Turkey. If you're a staunch secularist, which doesn't mean that much, but if you're a member of the Republican People's Party, you'll probably think differently about it. So anyway, I mean, I think this probably doesn't answer your question, but I have so many more questions to go. The perceptions on Greece. I mean, obviously, until as a consequence of the 1980 military coup, but also from before, Turkey was imagined and also taught in school as a country that is encircled only by enemies. And obviously Greeks were among like the most important, the most hated enemies and so on. In the last 10 years, that has changed very, very massively. I mean, people are simply not, not obsessed with this idea of enmity that much anymore. And this is true for all countries, for all kind of neighboring countries. Obviously, with Greece, I mean, unlike with Armenians, for instance, who were, where there's a much kind of darker history there. I think with Greece, there was always the hatred mixed with like some kind of underlying love and so on. So all these kind of, you know, when I remember when Theodorakis came to Turkey first in the mid-1980s, for instance, that was a massive event. You know, no one. I mean, John Baez also came. I mean, those were the first kind of events after the military coup. And you know, Theodorakis was much more important than John Baez, which for left-wing liberals and so on was also important. But, so I mean, there is this kind of interest, but I think generally, of course, for Turks, Greece was never as important as Turkey has been for Greeks, because it's a bigger country and Turkey has many kind of neighbors and so on. But I mean, generally, I think people have just become much less obsessed with this idea that Turkey is encircled by enemies. And I think, yeah. So I mean, generally, it's not it's not as negative as it used to be. I mean, it's interesting. It's probably also reflecting the situation here. I mean, I see like these TV series and all that. And there's, you know, everybody goes to Istanbul, brings baklava now. There's also you know, Hizmet. Oh, I thought it's the other one. What's it? No, the one in Istanbul, which everybody goes to, Bilgeoğlu, or something like that. I mean, they have like their branch in Athens and so on. So all that's there. But at the same time, when you look at how Greeks, for instance, look at Turkey, it's still the country which is most feared in terms of like you know, perception. So I'm not a big fan of these kind of big kind of surveys and so on, but I think that like in the Turkish debate, there always, among certain segments of society, there was always sympathy as well, but then there was this general kind of negative sense. In school books still, of course, like Greeks are not just depicted as our kind of friends. But I think, I mean, what is important is, I think, that this sense of like intimate danger or immediate danger is definitely not there anymore. And then, you know, people come to Greece. I mean, they try, if they can get a visa, they go to the islands, and so that's. And I hope there will be more of that. On Libya, well, I think you're right. I mean. Because this Libyan intervention seemed to have Sarkozy as a major player in it, and Turkey is not you know, I mean, understandably the Turkish government has issues with Sarkozy, and Sarkozy seems to have big issues with Turkey and with the current government. And also, like, I mean, I don't know, once we read about the history of this Libyan intervention, I wouldn't be surprised if we learn that, you know, the main kind of motivation for this was Sarkozy's interest to kind of increase his approvals, or to make sure that not too many refugees are coming over, and so on. But one important thing is, of course, that Turkey is now the only Western power in Libya which has an embassy. So it's like, it's actually the most important go-between with the Libyan government. And at the moment, the Turkish embassy in Tripoli actually represents American interests there. So, you know, things might not always be as they seem, and this whole Libyan intervention is a very messy one, so we might have to wait to see what the kind of dynamics are behind that. Now, Turkey as a secular state, what have the Arabs, I mean, have the Arabs been misguided by kind of looking up to the Turkish model? I'm not so sure whether the Arabs, I mean, in the Arab world until 10 years ago, you know, the view on Turkey was probably as bad as it used to be in Greece. I mean, you know, secular Arab nationalism and Islamism was very much anti-Turkish. Turks were seen as like betrayers to the cause of Islam. You know, Atatürk was not very much liked in the Muslim world in general. And it really only changed with this government. I mean, the fact that you had